The gospel lesson today is a story we're all very familiar with, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus was speaking, and a lawyer came up to him and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And the lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And just who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And so likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. And then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Now which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Here ends the gospel. On Tuesday, this past week, there was an article in the Telegram that caught my attention immediately, and probably most of you read it too. The title of the article is "Veteran Suicides, Families Haunted." There's a man by the name of Kevin Lucy who made no bounds about telling a group of clergy about his loss of faith. "God and I have not been on good terms for 6 years. He turned his back on my son, and I will never forgive him for that." Mr. Lucy told a group gathering recently at the Leominster Veterans Center for a workshop on helping war veterans and their families readjust to daily life. Mr. Lucy's son, Jeff, a Marine reservist who served in the first Iraq invasion in 2003, hanged himself in the family's basement a year after he returned to his Belchertown home. He was 23 years old. The tragedy occurred after his family tried for months to get Jeff, a popular class clown at his high school days, tried to get him treatment for what seemed an obvious case of post-traumatic stress system. "People other than us should have cared," an angry Mr. Lucy told the group. "I'm faulting the VA hospital, I'm faulting the church, and I'm faulting God." There have been a lot of, once again, suicides among military personnel, much like there was after the Vietnam War. Some of the issues, obviously, in war are so terrifying, so awful, that for some people, post-traumatic stress syndrome sets in, and they have a very difficult time for quite a while after their times of service. I want to make a comparison to this with this article to the gospel story of the Good Samaritan. Because Jeff Lucy, like so many of us and so many veterans, in fact, are like that person in the ditch. Wasn't anything that they brought on themselves. Sometimes life just gets unbelievably difficult, and our resources for coping, each one of us in this room, quite frankly, are limited, although there are times, especially when we are younger, when we think they're unlimited. Those of you who are at least as old as I am, have all come to grips with the fact that our limitations, all of a sudden, the list got real long. I thought about that when I was in the hospital for the surgery, and not only did I have an already list of limitations, but I thought after the surgery maybe there'll be even more. And when my doctor said to me, he was talking about my weight, and he said to me, because and I don't really know how he found out, but he knew that I was a ball player at one time in my life, and he said, "What was your playing weight when you played baseball?" And I told him 190. He said, "That's where you should be. That should be your weight." More good news, just running rampant all over me during those times. More limitations for me, and I know the same for you. And you and I have suffered maybe not a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but there are times when we are very stressed and all kinds of things all of a sudden happen to us, especially as we get older. We start having physical ailments. We start to add up things in our head that probably don't really add up, but now all of a sudden, because of all the stress, we aren't able to see some of the realities in our lives, even the things we should be thankful for, quite frankly. And we are very distracted people. We are very distracted people. I saw one of the worst distractions in our life in action on a replay of a baseball game on CNN. There was a person in the stands with the cell phone in his hand, talking on the cell phone. Guy hits a home run. It hits on a railing about 20 feet in front of this guy and comes right at him. He's talking on the cell phone. You know what this fool did? He ducked. He ducked. The ball was right to him. It was an easy catch. And because he's on the cell phone, he ducked. I wish I knew that guy's name. I put him on YouTube also. How could you possibly, for those of us who are baseball fans, miss a baseball because I'd have thrown the phone up in the stands and caught the ball? Distractions. And our agenda, too. Our agenda, too, is unbelievable. And so the agenda shows itself, of course, in the parable, too. Because you have two church people, a priest and a Levite, who would be like the president of a congregation. Too distracted to help this person. So we have the story of post-traumatic stress. Obviously, the man is attacked by robbers. We have the man in the ditch. We have the two people who pass him by. We have the Samaritan, and somewhere down later in the story, there's an innkeeper. In relation to Mr. Leahy's complaint about God turned his back, or her back, on his son, notice in the parable, there's one character who isn't present. God is not present in this parable. In fact, in many of Jesus' stories, he doesn't bring God in as the main character in any sense. He doesn't say things about God that would make us rely on the fact that when we have these serious problems, God is going to speed in and intervene in some way that we could make a story out of, you know? And it's always been interesting to me that when you read these stories, so often our theology, our personal ideas about God, our personal belief, our own faith is something that you live on day by day, isn't in the story. Or it doesn't square with the story. So what about this father who says God turned his back on his son? You see, in this story, unless the Samaritan acts, God has no part in the drama. God isn't present in any way in this drama unless the Samaritan acts.